I'd like to have you imagine yourself as a colonist on a farm or homestead in the early days of the country. There's talk of revolution, and you're a bit on the fence. You're not quite sure. Yes, the king has done some terrible things, and you're not really happy with the situation, but you're comfortable with what you're doing. But along comes a document, and it's called the Declaration of Independence. It spreads through the colonies like wildfire, and it does list the problems of the monarchy and what happened, but more than that, it's not just what you were fighting against, but it would give you a reason for something to fight for. And that was a government that would be of the people. And later, Lincoln would characterize this as simply, democracy is a government of, by, and for all of the people. Many young men joined for that reason. But let's say somebody had come up to you at that same time and said, hey, oh, but by the way, after this is all over, we're going to write a constitution. In the constitution, we're going to make it sort of like, we're going to kind of make an American version of British aristocracy. We're going to have a kind of an American aristocracy. Do you think they would have found any soldiers to fight for that cause? No, we know they wouldn't. They would have lost the war. But that is what happened. We do have an American aristocracy. If there's any doubt, just look in the society pages of any newspaper in America. And nobody begrudges a society paper or anything of that kind. The only thing is, should it be so strong that it takes over the rest of the country and that we lose our democracy in the process? Let's talk about something else that is often talked about many times by conservatives who say we don't really live in a democracy, we live in a republic. When they get exasperated, they usually bring up that argument. We are a republic, we're not a democracy. Well, the way we toss that argument aside pretty quickly is a republic is merely a form. It's elected representatives. So all the people of Illinois couldn't make it to Washington. So they decide among themselves democratically. They elect representatives to represent them to go to Washington to represent their views. So democracy is primary, and yes, representatives are involved because not everybody can go there. Okay, it's really pretty simple. So, right within the Constitution, it's not really a very perfect document. I used to think it was, but we had the 3/5 rule that permitted slavery. It's in our Constitution. It shows immediately that we have a defective document there. And I never believed that when I was growing up. Like many of you, you just say it's the greatest thing ever. But we see that there are many flaws in it. So it took the Civil War to right those wrongs. And after that, industrialism started to grow. The slaves were freed. And corporations began to be very powerful. And they went to the Supreme Court. They used to be always underneath government. There are many documents about this. If you want some, I can give you references. POCLAD was the Program on Corporations, Law, and Democracy. Lots of studies there. The Corporate Accountability Project and ReclaimDemocracy.org all talk about how corporations have basically taken over America and our lives. And gradually, though, some amendments started coming in, which our founders wisely decided this would be a way to update things in a way, and to make democracy more real. So black people could vote, black men, eventually women were allowed to vote, and all the other amendments we have. So that was a good sign. But with that industrialization came some very bad economic situations, and that set the stage really for unions being formed and this struggle between our economic system and our political system. Our economic system versus our democracy. And that is a struggle, just as before it was about slavery. Today it's about our economic system controlling and really virtually buying and selling politicians like cattle. So along comes Teddy Roosevelt, who busted the trusts and established national parks and did a lot of other good things as a Republican candidate, something he could never do today, would not even be elected. But the greatest achievement for corporate power was the 1934 Telecommunications Act, which essentially privatized our free speech by allowing corporations to manage our airwaves. They don't own them, we own them. But it's a very odd kind of ownership. It's like we have a car, but every time we want to use the car, we have to ask somebody for the key. You could say you own the car, we own the airwaves, but it doesn't mean much because you have to constantly ask for the key. It's not your key, so you can't use it. So do we have free speech? Nominally. Do we own the airwaves? Nominally. Doesn't mean much because we have to always ask for the key, and we may or may not get it. Most often we don't. Ask unions whether we have free speech in the corporate media. When have you ever seen one union show on television? There are many channels, many networks devoted to finance, not one about unions. Now, doesn't that tell you something about a free speech that's actually disastrous, that's not really, doesn't even exist? In a democracy, unions would have time on television. In a democratic media, we don't have a democratic media. We have a corporate media. The kind of freedom we have is like some people complain when they say, we have 500 channels and nothing to watch. That's our freedom. I call it vending machine freedom. We have the freedom to go up to the vending machine, put in our money, and then we get to choose from the items in the vending machine. But we don't have the freedom to decide what goes into the vending machine. Somebody else makes those decisions. Those are the people with the real freedom. That's real freedom. Now, a lot of those decisions are being made by other people that we have nothing to say about. You could call that freedom, and many people do. In fact, they say that's the free enterprise system at work. But I don't call that freedom. I call it vending machine freedom, or choice. And you're allowed choice, but choice isn't the same thing as freedom. Some people, Chris Hedges, the award-winning journalist from formerly the New York Times, calls us not only not a democracy, we're a corporate state. Nader and many others call us a plutocracy ruled by the rich or an oligarchy ruled by the few. Gore Vidal said it was never intended for us to be a democracy from our very beginnings. And he knows something about the subject. You might know many of his books about the early colonial period. Others go much, much further. He took 7 fascist regimes from Nazi Germany, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Greece, Chile, and Suharto's Indonesia, and looked for the common characteristics. I'm just going to read a few of the 14, but this should ring some bells. Powerful and continuing expressions of nationalism, prominent display of flags and bunting, to a big ubiquitous lapel pins. Who can run for office today unless they have an American flag in their lapel? Can't do it. Disdain for human rights, identification of enemies as scapegoats, the supremacy of the military. We now are paramilitarizing our domestic police forces. Rampant sexism, anti-abortion, and homophobia, very key to the Nazis' program, by the way. A controlled mass media. Some may not agree, but I've just given you some reasons to believe that. And if some of you still don't believe it, let me just give you a little quick side story. They say, well, how can you keep talking corporate media, corporate media? Let me ask you this. If you were going to buy a new car, say you went to the Ford dealer and you were going to buy a car, and you asked, to look at the models, you did all that. And do you expect when you go there that he's going to say, oh, by the way, Car and Driver voted Toyota the best car this year? I was amazed. It's really a terrific car. And in fact, there's some new programs out where you don't even have to have a car. Are you going to get that from a Ford dealer? Of course not. They're there to sell you Fords. Now, why would you suppose that a corporate media would be any different? They're not. They're selling advertising to other corporations. So, obsession with national security. We have homeland security now. Corporations are protected and unions are suppressed. 12% of our workers are now protected. Only 7% of the private sector are protected. And guess what it is in the Scandinavian countries? 70%. And that's why they have a huge middle class, because to have a middle class means to have an income. And that's how they protect their workers. So what we have is a kind of vending machine freedom and a kind of Disney democracy, which is like Epcot. You know, it looks like France and seems like France, but isn't France. And so one of the other things is I like to divide this, and sometimes people get a little annoyed with me with this. Wouldn't be the first time. But the Latin American model is one way we could go, and that's a few families own a lot of things. That's happening in America now. And the Scandinavian model, which is a high taxes but well-distributed income, and they're at the top of all the lists of happiness and the best countries to live in and so on. That's been brought home to me by this little article I found about the Latin American, South American model. A dozen years ago, Brazil ranked as the world's most unequal nation, the top having 50 times more income. Affluent Brazilians found themselves spending $2 billion a year on private security, $35,000 fortified automobiles, flying by helicopter from fortified home to fortified offices. Could inequality that stark be happening in the United States? The United States, says Fernando Luiz, who is the Center Director of Brazilian Studies at the University of Texas, will be as unequal as Brazil. That's the Latin American model. The Gini coefficient, which is the measurement that the World Bank and the CIA use to determine inequality in the world. 0 means perfect equality, 1 means the worst inequality. Brazil was 0.6. The United States was about 0.3, 0.4. We're going to converge by 2015 at 0.5. So we've been doing very well in emulating Brazil and the Latin American model. But still, the United States is still on the democracy index, one of the great democracies of the world, but the only thing is we're slipping. We're at number 21 now. And guess who's near the top? Yeah, you guessed it. It's those darn Scandinavian countries. They just seem to win all the prizes, and no matter whether it's happiness or the best place to live or whatever it is, it's outrageous that they get. There must be some conspiracy to put them up front there. Well, the Democracy Index is created by the Economist of London's intelligence unit. And North Korea is like at the bottom, with some countries that we are friends with, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman. And the top, of course, Norway, Sweden, Iceland, Denmark, New Zealand, Australia, Switzerland, and Canada, and Finland and the Netherlands. This index is based on pluralism, electoral process, civil liberties, functioning of government, political participation, and political culture. So that's where we stand internationally. But there's another area we're involved. We want to spread our democracy around. We love it so much and it's so great that we want to spread it to other countries. So we created the National Endowment for Democracy. You might have heard of it, NED. That's part of the State Department. Now, you would think that in one area, look, it's America after all, wouldn't we want to get together with all the political people and say, well, let's spread our idea of democracy around? No, that's not the way it works. Actually, the Republicans have their version of democracy. It's called the International Republican Institute under the umbrella of NED. And the Democrats have theirs called the National Democratic Institute for International Affairs with Madeleine Albright as the head. John McCain headed the Republican Institute since 1993. Eva Gollinger wrote a scathing indictment of the IRI recently. She quotes Alan Weinstein, who was one of the founders in the Washington Post. A lot of what we do today was done covertly by the CIA many years ago. That's a pretty candid admission, especially when you consider books like The Open Veins of Latin America and The Confessions of an Economic Hitman, to say, well, we can just do this right out in the open now. Who's going to stop us? So we're falling behind in many, many areas of the world. And our style democracy is being rejected by emerging nations because they see what's happening here in the great inequality. Well, Joseph Stiglitz, who is the Nobel Prize winning author of The price of inequality, how today's divided society endangers our future. The main cause is political manipulation of rules and regulations by American businesses. It's not because, as some of the conservative think tanks like to say, because they're just better at what they do. This is manipulation of the rules through political power. Raw political power. And who's going to suffer? The worst will be the poor, then the middle class, and our whole country will suffer, but especially our democracy. Our democracy will suffer. And that's what this subject is how to make our democracy real. So their solutions is to try to create some mechanisms to increase wages and employment and a small financial tax and so on. And those things could very well work. No one's against that. It should be done. But just to continue on that point, I think we should just refer back to David DeGraw, who wrote a book called The Financial Terrorism of America. And here's some points he makes. This is general knowledge. You can find these stats anywhere, but he just has them in a nice place. 62 million people in America have zero net worth. The economic elite after 2008 made off with $46 trillion with a T. From 2005 to 2009, the average household wealth dropped 28%. 52 million people live in poverty. 1 in 4 children live in poverty. 9 U.S. cities have a poverty rate of 25%. Unemployment is not 9%. It's closer to 20% when you use alternative methods of measurements. Cost of living increased 67%. That's a tough one. From 1990 to 2010. The income during that period dropped 6%. Millionaire households have $38 trillion in wealth, with $6 trillion sitting in offshore accounts. They will have, if things continue the way they are, $100 trillion by the next decade. So that's where we are at the moment. Now, let's see if we can find some possible solutions or some different ways of looking at this. It's certainly not going to be easy. I think it's pretty obvious, isn't it? We don't have to reinvent the wheel. The wheel's right there for us to see. All we have to do is look at the democracy index, the best countries to live in the world indexes, the happiness indexes. It's all there right out in the open for everybody to see. Those Scandinavian countries are running away with everything. That's the wheel. Now we will choose either to emulate that or we will keep drifting to the Latin American model and follow Brazil. We have a choice. We can do that. We know where we're going right now. It seems like that's the direction we're going. We might find a middle ground. That's what people have been trying to do now for some time, is to maintain, just by with their white knuckling, to hang on where we are right now so we don't have to be like those damn Scandinavians. In those countries, of course, there's no need for charity. We have a wonderful grant program here. Won't be necessary in a Scandinavian type country. All taken care of. Don't have to worry about that. People don't have to suffer like that. So you can see that without economic democracy, there is no political democracy. It's not possible. It's a pipe dream. The inequality that Stiglitz taught is the direct result of too much power in the economic side of the ledger and not enough democracy. That's what's happened, and it's easy for that to happen. Happiness is the result, almost always, of a truly functioning democracy. Two people that I really like are Abraham Maslow, who, if you're in the health field or just a good study habits, did the hierarchy of human needs. And you start out with basic needs like food and clothing and a home and so on. Those are basic needs. Those need to be met. In a decent, basic society, that's what everybody has to have. That doesn't seem to be a concern of ours at the moment. And Sam Harris, who is one of my favorite writers, says that he brought this wonderful phrase to the table. And he says that there are things that promote human flourishing, and there are other things that do not promote human flourishing. And science is going to help us understand that. Religion has done a pretty bad job at it. It's taken a stab. It's not done too well in showing us which things help human flourishing. But I'd like to read especially this quote from Freud in one of my favorite little books called The Future of an Illusion, his really brilliant analysis of religion and its place in the world. Here's what Freud says. He's primarily talking about the id here. New generations who have been brought up in kindness and taught to have a high opinion of reason and who have experienced the benefits of civilization at an early age will have a different attitude towards it. They will feel it as a possession of their very own and will be ready for its sake to make the sacrifices as regards work and instinctual satisfaction that are necessary for its preservation. They will be able to do without coercion and will differ little from their leaders. If no culture has so far produced human masses of such quality, it's because no culture has yet devised regulations, laws, etc., which will influence men in this way, and in particular from childhood onwards. Now we know that's no longer true because it is occurring in the Scandinavian countries. From early on, they are doing exactly what Freud prescribed here. So let's step forward by stepping back. I'd like to talk a little bit about my own trip to Norway, because it was the best country in the world to live in. I wanted to go there and see for myself. I did, and the first thing I realized when I got there is that it's really true that the media lies over and over, bold-faced lies. That's not a socialist country. I went into all the, when I drove back, there were tons of American corporations, from Firestone to Ford to McDonald's to Subway to Burger King, and I walked into many of them and said, does the government own this store? They looked at me like I was crazy. What do you mean the government? No, we own it. But I'm told by the corporate media over and over and over again, there's socialism there, socialism. They're a democracy first and foremost. Don't let anybody get you on that argument. They're a democracy, but they do not allow money in their elections. Therefore, the people they elect to office represent the people. What a concept, huh? Elect somebody who actually represents you instead of the moneyed interests that put them in office. Now, if somebody can please whisper that into the ear of the Supreme Court, then we'd be good. Especially this Roberts Court with the Citizens United decision will go down in history as the worst decision, along with the Dred Scott decision and the Plessy versus Ferguson decision, as the worst Supreme Court decision in history, because they have permitted outright bribery and corruption to occur through money in politics. That's what they've done. They've allowed it, just like Plessy allowed separate but equal for 50 years. So one day I'm walking downtown and I go to this little park, and here's a huge red granite statue of FDR, enormous. And it's facing the Oslo Harbor, the place where the Nobel Prizes are given not too far away. And I followed up on it, and a friend of mine there, I asked him, and he said, yes, Eleanor came over and gave the dedication. And I was thinking, isn't that something? They are great admirers of FDR, and I thought, well, let me look back. And so I did to FDR's 1944 speech, and where he said, necessitous men are not free men. People who are hungry and out of a job are the stuff of which dictatorships are made. These economic truths, which have become accepted as self-evident, we have accepted a second Bill of Rights under which a new basis of security and prosperity can be established for all, regardless of station, race, or creed. And here's what he called the Economic Bill of Rights. The right to a useful and remunerative job in the industries or shops or farms or mines of the nation. The right to earn enough to provide adequate food and clothing and recreation. The right of every farmer to raise and sell his products. The right of every businessman, large and small, to trade in an atmosphere of freedom. The right of every family to a decent home. Wouldn't that be something? And perhaps protections against foreclosures. The right to adequate medical care. There comes Obamacare, much hated by some people. The right to an adequate protection from the economic fears of old age, sickness, accident, and unemployment. The right to a good education. All these rights spell security. And I'd like to mention that we often hear a lot from some quarters about the pursuit of happiness. Oh, we're not guaranteed anything. We're just guaranteed the right to pursue happiness. That's what we do for that, because you've been drummed into your head over and over again. But just a little further down in the Declaration is another use of the word happiness. I ask you, encourage you to find it. I'll give it to you right now. And that was, if the government doesn't do its job, we have a right to alter or abolish it, and to institute a new government which will, and this is the key word, effect, E-F-F-E-C-T. What does effect mean? Make happen. It's safety and happiness. Not at the pursuit of happiness, to effect happiness. Guns and butter. It's right there in the Declaration. That's what the founding soldiers fought for. May not be what the founding fathers wrote in the Constitution, but it's what the founding soldiers fought for in the Declaration. So I would encourage you at some point, if you get a chance, or have especially a young friend, or you could sponsor somebody, send them to Norway or Sweden for something. I've been trying to work for some time and trying to have an exchange program where we could send some of our people over there to see. Oslo is so vibrant, it just comes alive. You can take from the downtown Oslo, you can take a tram, streetcar, up to the mountains in 20, 30 minutes and be in the middle of nowhere. And a lot of young people do that for almost nothing. And they go traipsing along these trails, and there's little places there where they can stay for free. People leave things there, even food and other things. Pretty amazing. So what to do, what to do? Well, we should keep doing what we're doing. We're the social action people in the world of religion. And that's why I joined this church. And I think many others did as well. Social action, economic justice. This is what we're made of. And let's continue on. We write our letters. We keep doing all the good things that we have to do. But I'm proposing a new set of crimes. After the World War II, there were the Nuremberg rules, Nuremberg crimes, and crimes against humanity. I'm proposing we have crimes against democracy. Crimes against democracy, crimes against the Constitution, because it's clear what people mean when Lincoln put it so well. A government of, by, and for the people, which we do not have now. Those who have done that to us need to stand trial one day. They need to be put on trial because they are destroying our democracy. That's a strong statement, but I'll stand by it. I believe that at least we need to look into that as an alternative, because maybe, just maybe, somebody may say, you know, maybe we're going a little bit too far here. Now they've started this crimes against democracy thing. You know, we could all be prosecuted. We could go to prison for this. Right now, nothing's stopping them. So it's a possible antidote. It's a possible antidote. I'm not saying it's all the answer. But before all that, I think the one thing we as liberals and progressives have forgotten, and we're going to go into the second part of the situation here now, and that is to honor those who come before us. Those people who have suffered and died for social and economic justice. And we need to have an annual memorial service honoring those people. Just like Memorial Day, we honor our soldiers, and we should. So I'd like to ask those I've asked earlier to come up to the stage, and we'll begin that part. Roberta, say Jay. Paul is here. Come on up.